Welcome! Healthcare Training Leader is thrilled to have you join us today for this important and free YouTube live stream webinar, Prevent New Manager Mistakes to Avoid Practice Disasters. Whether you're a brand new manager or you're guiding someone who is, you're in the right place to learn how to avoid those all too common missteps that can lead to practice headaches down the line. First, a big thank you to our presenter and expert today, Don Phin. Don is a nationally recognized workplace expert, attorney, speaker, and coach who's been helping managers get it right for decades. If you haven't already, check him out at www.donphin.com. Seriously, this guy is a powerhouse. Also, a heartfelt thank you to you, our amazing audience, for joining us today. Your time is valuable, and we're excited to deliver insights you can actually use starting today. Quick heads up, at any point during this webinar, feel free to drop a comment in that chat that says New Manager Training. When you do, you'll receive an exclusive discount on any Healthcare Training Leader product or service. It's our way of saying thanks for being here and investing in your leadership journey. And before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the Healthcare Training Leader YouTube channel. Stay up to date with the latest in healthcare compliance, billing and coding updates, revenue cycle management training, and so much more tailored just for you. All right, let's get started and set your new managers and your practice up for success. Over to you, Don.
Hi, hey, thank you, and I'll take it from here. Welcome, everybody. But the fun news is I just got off of 2 trainings with companies that I've been training their managers this morning. And so this is something I do a lot of. I like also creating some tools. So I gave you a couple of things like a poster and a monthly checklist to check things out. So hopefully those are some benefit. I've worked with a lot of HR executives and helped them get better at what they're doing. And today's presentation is really geared for the people who are helping the new manager. If a new manager were to watch this, they would benefit from it as well. But it's really geared to helping with new managers. And I don't know about you, but a lot of my clients post-COVID have a lot of new employees. There's been a lot of attrition, a lot of people going to management roles for the first time. And a lot of them are very young. They don't have management experience. And just as anything, half the managers that are out there are better than the other half of the managers. I know that much. And we certainly want to train people up when we can. Okay. So let's get moving. Well, here's what I want to talk about. First of all, how good do people want to be as managers? And it's very interesting. Sometimes the decision to have somebody in management is just your decision. It wasn't the employee's decision. The employee didn't come to you and say, hey, I want to be in management. It's something that we promote people to. And one of the questions always asked, do you even want to be a manager? And there's a lot of studies that show that for a lot of people, the answer is no. They don't really want to be a manager. They don't want to take on the added responsibility. They don't want to be separated from their buddies who they worked with for years. They don't want to have to work what they perceive as extra hours, maybe go into an exempt status so they're not an hourly employee anymore. And if somebody doesn't really want to be in management, it's a mistake. And so I always ask how good they want to be. And here's something I've had when I put people in management at my company. I let them know that, look, going into management is really an experiment because we don't know if you'll like it, if you'll be good at it, if I think you'll be good at it, if I like what you're doing. And what we're going to agree up front is that if it works out fine, then you're a manager. But if I don't think it's working out or you don't think it's working out, there's no losing face if we put you back to the job you did very well. Because what ends up happening is we typically take a top performing person and put them in a management position. It happens in sales all the time. Take the top salesperson and make them a sales manager. Well, if they don't work out as a sales manager, let them go. Not only lost a sales manager, you lost your top selling salesperson, right? So I have no problem with an upfront agreement with people saying, look, if it doesn't work, you can raise your hand, I can raise your hand, and you can go back to what you're doing very well. That's how we run our deal. Nobody loses face doing that, okay? Management 2.0 is really about the lack of control. So management you look at the study of management, it used to be called control and domination style of management. When our grandparents worked, was just do what I tell you, don't think for yourself. Well, that's dead. So this whole idea of controlling people doesn't work anymore. And new managers it's one of the biggest challenges they face. Anybody, and managers, executives, the CEOs I speak to, the number one concern the CEOs have is letting go of control. So this is everybody in supervision, management, executive ranks, period. I also want my managers to understand the math of what they're doing. One of the things I did a lot of teaching of HR people is they want to be strategic, they want to sit at the table, but it's very hard to be strategic if you don't know math. So I want my managers to know some basics around math, and I'm going to share with you what that is all about. Now, one of their jobs is to help build a team, and those managers may be involved in the hiring process. They should at least have a voice in who comes onto their team, even if recruiting and HR are doing a lot of the lifting and all of that. Performance management is a big deal because the bottom line is productivity. The bottom line is everybody's got a job security if they're productive, and if it's a manager, if their teams are productive. We've all seen an example. I worked with a number of law firms for many years, and what ends up happening is they don't really have strong management layers. They just have different layers of lawyers. Sometimes they'll have an office manager or somebody in HR, but the managers are really the lawyers. And what happens is you have typically one assistant or secretary or paralegal per partner, but at the associate level, it's generally shared by two of them. So now you have two managers, two lawyers who have no management training, and they're managing one person. And what you'll see is what that person can control is their skill set. So, for example, I can assess the skill set of a legal secretary, and they can type 100 words per minute. I can do them a quiz on how to file stuff. So you can see that from a skill standpoint, they're very highly rated. But the system they find themselves in is those two lawyers managing them. So you have somebody with a really high skill set. I'm just going to use a metaphor here. They can type 100 words per minute, but they're in a poor management system. And you got somebody who types 80 words per minute, and they're really good management system. So 100 in poor management, 80 in good management. At the end of the day, who ends up with better performance? And everybody says the same thing, 80 in a good system. Who gets the better performance evaluation? 80 in a good system. Who gets the raise? 80 in a good system. Does that seem fair to the employee who can't control the system they find themselves in? So performance management is a big deal, and we'll notice some managers outperform other managers because, for me, performance management happens at a very local level. You can have all the programs in the world. You can have all the leadership saying this is what we want out of people, but where the rubber really meets the road is with that manager and that team, right? That's where performance management really happens. One of the things I've noticed, I coach a lot of managers, and every one of them, it's not one that I haven't coached that hasn't said they're feeling slightly overwhelmed or completely overwhelmed. And you might be feeling that too. When I was a trial lawyer, I worked over 70 hours a week for years. And then it burnt out the first marriage, burnt out me. And by the time I was 40, I didn't want to do it anymore. So I decided at that point, I would never work over 40 hours a week again. And when I built my company, I would not allow any of my employees to work over 40 hours a week. But guess what? That means we had to be really efficient about how we used our time. So I went on a deep dive about time management for 3 years, and I wrote 2 books around it. Both of them are up on my website. You can just download them. But I'm going to share some of the most important things that these managers need to know about time management, right? The old adage is people don't think you care about them, why should they care about you? So there's the challenge about the time management and showing that you care. We'll talk about that. And the last thing is the business of career planning. And as Mary Kay so famously said, most people plan their vacations better than their careers. I want my managers to see a roadmap. I want them to know what the opportunity is and work to that opportunity in terms of training and education and career advancement, because that helps both making them more productive, helps retain them, all those types of good things. So that is our outline for today. Okay. As we go back, how good do you want to be? Do you want to be in the top 50% of managers? Do you want to be in the top 25% of managers? One of my favorite books is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And Jim Collins says that great companies are top 10% companies. How can you be a top 10% company without having top 10% managers or employees? And if you want to be world class is 1%. Google is a world-class company. They're going to hire top 1% managers or keep 1% managers because they want to have 1% engineers. All right. So we really want to ask, how good do we want to be? And are we going to accept mediocrity with our management team? 50%? Hey, as long as they're about average, that's fine with me. Or no, we want great managers. And what will it take for that person to get there? And do they have an interest? You can actually ask them. It's a great question to ask. Where do you want to be? And see what they say about it. Now, we've got to let people know the why of it. Why do you want to be a great manager? No, well, it gives me career opportunities. It gives me job security. It gives me greater pay, greater self-satisfaction. I have more impact on other people. I always say, you know, we can think about the immediate relationship between me and the employee, but what I realized when I was a boss and I was managing people, that if somebody has a bad day working for me, who pays the price? The people they go home to, the kids. I'm sure you can remember when your parents came home upset. I remember my old man would come upset. I want to get in another room and get out of the way right away, because that upset sometimes turned home. Right. So there's a lot of why, as managers, we have to fully understand the impact we have on other people's lives, not just our own. Now, Maslow, if we might have all had our dose of Maslow in Psychology 101, but there's been no improvement on this. He wrote this in 1954. And one reason that I should care is people, and including me, have physiological needs. You might be in a situation where low-wage earners, people living paycheck to paycheck. If they're out of work for 2 weeks, they're in extreme financial stress. So as a manager, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want my people to have to lose their job because they may really put them on edge. We saw what COVID did to people who didn't have financial security or on edge with their jobs. A lot of them lost their jobs. Look how many people ended up on the street, right? Then we have the safety needs. We want this to last for a while. And you might as well call the safety needs job security. So how does a manager know that they have job security? They do a great job. I don't think anybody who's listening to this has ever fired somebody who's doing a great job, right? So how do we have that security? Is everybody's at will unless they have a contract, right? So job security is really about doing a great job. Now, the third need is a need to the belonging, and that's when we're going to talk about that team aspect. Who's my tribe? Ancient people went from physiological needs to wanting it to last for a while, and now to strength in numbers. So do animals. These first three needs are our animal basis needs. So what's the tribe? Who do we belong to? That's a lot of times the culture of an organization, the culture of a team. Then we have esteem needs. Now that I can look in a puddle and say, oh, wow, I am. Who am I? Well, who do I want to be? That's our ego and self-esteem. And we want our managers to feel good about who they are. We want our managers to have a healthy self-esteem. We want our managers to create a healthy self-esteem for the people they manage. Now that I've taken care of all of my needs and my ego and my self-esteem are in place, now the question is, how do I make my dent in the universe, right? How do I make a difference? And again, when you have high-performing employees who have all these needs met, then they can really want to make a dent in the universe and make a dent with their customers and their clients and each other, because all this other stuff is taken care of. So why should I care? This is the answer to why I should care. One of the exercises I like people going through is a 10 why worksheet. And you ask people why they want to be good, why they this, why this. I want them to write 10 reasons why they want to be a great manager. Now, the first couple of reasons will come out really easy. But then it gets a little harder. And that's when you build up mental muscle, when you start going to questions 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and finally 10. What are 10 ways that we can improve performance? What are 10 ways we can hire better? What are 10 ways we can better engage and motivate people? I love 10 whys because it really forces you to think past the first couple of them. It's a great mental exercise. So make sure your new managers know their whys. And this is incredibly powerful stuff. If you haven't seen Simon Sinek's TED Talk on the power of why, I encourage you to spend 20 minutes watching it, because that's the bullseye, and everything radiates out from that. So management 2.0, and by the way, I love, this stock photography. I've never been on a Zoom meeting that looked this good. But nobody's in a garage, nobody's in their bathroom. Pretty funny. But management 2.0, as I mentioned, is all about the death of control. All about it. So if you can't control people, and you don't want to control people, you think about it. Anybody on this, do you want to be controlled by your boss? And if you do, why is that the case? Do you feel that you're not self-capable and that you just want to be controlled and tell me what to do and I'll do it? What comes along with the control-based approach is, if you're going to tell me what to do and I do it, then you've got to take care of me. That was the old way of the workplace. And do what I tell you to do. Don't think for yourself. We'll give you a pension that you can live off of. You'll have secure employment with a pension you can live off of until you're 67, And that's dead. The catch-22 today is, the less I control, the more I accomplish. And one of the challenges, new managers can be very controlling because they know the best way to do things sometimes. And they want to make sure everybody does exactly the way they want to do it, instead of having people think for themselves, which is what you really want. The catch-22 today is, the person you can control is the one you don't want working for you. And Stephen Covey's son wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. It was very based on the fact that if you can't control people, then you've got to be able to trust them. So what makes any one of us trustworthy, what makes me trustworthy or you trustworthy, is both the skills. We have the skills that I can trust your skill set, and I can trust your desire to deploy them. So as a new lawyer, I couldn't wait to try a case, but I never tried a case before. You're going to trust me as a guy who never tried a case before? That's why new lawyers, the first cases they try are usually pretty horrible, right? Nobody else wanted to represent this client. Now you get to, right? Here I am at 40. I never lost a case I took to trial. I was a really good trial attorney, but I was burnt out. I didn't want to do it anymore. I was really talented, but didn't want to do it anymore. You're going to trust me? You're going to trust a brain surgeon who doesn't want to do surgery anymore? I hope not. Okay. And the last thing is, this business about responsibility. And the main distinction here is, you're not responsible for the people you manage. You're responsible to the people you manage. And I can see new managers that get caught in this responsibility for thing. They want to jump in, they micromanage, they want to do the job for somebody else, instead of stepping back and realize, my job as a manager is to put you in a position where you're capable of success, not to do your job for you or micromanage you. Control is dead. The less I control, the more I accomplish. I have so many managers that I'm overwhelmed, and that's because they're still trying to do the nobody gets $10 an hour work, but $20 an hour work of their subordinates still, when they should be doing their $50 an hour management. How do you control change? How do you control creativity, which is what we need more than anything else? You can't. So you really need trust to succeed today. Again, trust is equal to skills and desire. We'll go back to this responsibility to thing. When I ask people, what does it mean to be responsible to the person to manage? Clarity of expectations, that's good. I'll talk about moving from expectations to agreements. We want to make sure they have the right tools, whether that's a hammer or a software program, right? We want to give clear instructions. All those types of things, people lay out being responsible to them. And when you draw the line underneath all of that, excuse me, the bottom line of being responsible to somebody is to put them in a position where they're capable of success. The bottom line of you dealing with a new manager is to put that manager in a position where they're capable of success. You are not responsible for that new manager. You're responsible for the system that will allow them to be a great manager. So the math of people. Very few people fully understand the math around personnel management. We look at data, we can pull so much data from HRIS systems, cost of hire, time to hire, things like that. But do we really understand the math around it? Does HR knows that? Does the manager know any of this stuff? The quality of management has an enormous impact on the bottom line. What happens when you hire a poor employee? It drags everybody down, and you're eventually going to have to replace them. They might sue you because everybody sues everybody for everything nowadays. They're certainly going to tap unemployment. And it's really destructive, but a lot of managers just hire people to get it over with so they can go back to doing their job. So they view hiring as something to get over. Causes disengagement, causes poor performance. It'll cause turnover, maybe not of that poor hire, but the person doesn't want to work with that poor hire. And of course, who's more risky from a safety and compliance standpoint? Great employees or poor employees? And you know the answer to that. So I'll go back to this for a minute. I ask the CEOs I speak to all the time, how much did the last bad hire cost you? And not one of them comes in at less than $50,000. Not one of them. One of the things, I ran a group, maybe the first HR mastermind group in the United States here in San Diego, pulled together the top CHROs in town from companies like Qualcomm and Illumina and University of California and Callaway Golf and big mechanical engineering firms. So really high-end CHROs all making good money, all right? And one of the things that we really started tackling was the math of people. And what we realized is that $50,000 a year person costs roughly $50,000 to replace. It's roughly a 1-to-1 at the middle level range. Somebody's a high-end executive, it's going to be more than 1-to-1. Somebody's fast food and it takes 2 weeks to train them up, it's going to be less than 1-to-1. The middle of the pack is roughly 1-to-1. All right. So what is the impact of being a boss who causes disengagement? People don't want to give it their full effort. 5% less productivity, 10% less productivity. What if they really don't know how to talk about performance and they don't really know how to do a good job of defining the benchmarks of quality and quantity? Again, the cost of all of this is a real number and impacts the bottom line. And what I've seen in any organization is at a minimum, there is a 10% variance. So if you've got, let's say, $1 million in payroll, there's at least $100,000 variance in that payroll that can be improved on easily. Now, in dealing with the CEOs and dealing with business owners, I realized very quickly that there's not a single CEO or business owner that's more interested in saving money than making money. I don't want to work for them if they're more interested in that. That's the CFO's job, right? So if I just talk to them, HR always talks to leadership in cost terms. Cost us $50,000 to replace that employee. Cost of hire is blank. I started changing the conversation to a revenue equivalency. And I spoke at 2 CPA conferences, and I asked them the same question. I said, look, if $50,000 comes out of pocket because you make a bad hire, how much money do I have to bring in top of the line to break even? And it's going to be a multiple, and it's not an ROI, return on investment, because you don't need to account for the fixed assets like the building is there and the insurance is there. You're really talking about what they call marginal replacement revenue. So I have to bring in X number of dollars to put $1 back in my pocket to break even again. And according to those CPAs in those conferences, at the minimum, it's 4-to-1. So a $50,000 out-of-pocket expense for employee turnover is the equivalent of sales having to bring in another $200,000 in revenue. Because out of that's going to come taxes, sales costs, commissions, enablement costs, marketing costs, all sorts of costs come out of it. And you're lucky to keep $1 out of $4. In some organizations, it's more than that. All right. So does my manager know that if they don't, most people are finally triggered, if they're happy about what they're getting paid, they like their work, the reason why they leave is because of their boss. My guess is there's people on the webinar today who have left their job because of their boss. Does their boss realize that losing that $50,000 person they manage just cost the company the equivalent of $200,000 in new revenue? One thing I have everybody take home is every HR problem becomes a sales problem. Who's going to make up for it? Does that manager realize that if they trigger somebody to leave, you just put a burden on the sales team to bring in another 200 grand? And then we want to go to what is the actual numbers they have to go through. So I had a client that lost 2 long-time admins. I said, all right, it costs a minimum of 50 grand. I knew that that business owner, for a new car sold, put $500 in his pocket. He had to sell 100 cars just to make up 50. I took him out the lot. I said, I want you to visually put a circle around 100 cars. You realize you're going to have to sell those 100 cars to make up for the fact you just lost 2 admins? Does everybody on his management team understand that? Okay. It's a lot of cars to be sold. So every personnel problem becomes a sales problem. So what can that manager do to decrease personnel costs through better management practices? Now, building the team. And hold on, I'm going to get something to drink here. You can hear my native New York, and I get on a roll, okay? There's a lot to share here today. So building your team. Business is a team sport, okay? And it's a couple of things I've learned when I ran my own company. First of all, none of us are smart as all of us. I'll never forget one of the business owners I was helping out. He ran a high-end garage facility that dealt with BMWs and Mercedes and things like that. He had a very loyal customer base and about 18 employees, and he was putting in 70-hour weeks. And his wife had an affair. He wasn't home. And the marriage counselor came to me and said, look, I can't help this couple until you help him work less. So I showed up to work with him one morning. And he literally opened up the garage bay doors. I'm like, really interesting skill set you got there, Bob, but maybe somebody else can do it just as well. And he got an automobile accident, broke 3 ribs and his leg. And he didn't come into work for more than 6 weeks. He ended up having his 2 best months ever when he wasn't there. 2 best months ever. I said, what did you learn from this? He goes, I never realized how smart my people were. So one of the challenges a new manager thinks that since they came out of the top, doing the doing, and now they're going to be managers, others doing the doing, that they're smarter than everybody else. It's a more than a less than game, right? Instead of realizing that collective intelligence will always be smarter than individual intelligence. Always. Okay? That's why there's 12 jurors. Okay? So none of us as smart as all of us. How are they making sure they are inclusive of their team members and bringing ideas instead of the my way or the highway type approach of management? New managers are going to be tested. And why are they going to be tested? Because we want to know we can trust them. New managers will have new things thrown at them to see how they handle it. So you can expect that you're going to be tested. Let them know that the team is going to test you because they want to know if they can trust you. All right. And then we've got to figure out how we can support our teammates. What can we do? Because one thing I realize about everybody is there's always something else going on with people. And it's not just about work. Okay. So who knows what type of argument they had before they came to work? Who knows what they may know that one of their beloved ones just got diagnosed with cancer. Who knows what's going on with anybody? Who knows what they're going to have to go home to tonight? So understanding that there's always something else going on with people and we want to support our teammates is a big deal. Now, one thing I did to try to make sure I motivated my team was I kept a little journal and a couple of pages for each employee, and I would write down things I learned about them. So I would learn that maybe their kid likes a certain sports team or they play a certain sport. And I'd find out maybe what their birthday was or what that employee's birthday was. And if they like a team, maybe I bought a jersey for that team for them, or I bought their kid a jersey. But just knowing that, showing that you care about people makes all the difference in the world. Now, can people be trusted? And first of all, yes, skills. We've got to test their skills. So half the people have a better skill set than the other half. How are you going to know if you can trust somebody without skill testing them? You also want to do personality assessments. So how are they going to show up? Are they big picture people or are they small people? Detail level people. If they're in medical coding, I want somebody to be detail oriented. If they're in sales, I want them to have a bigger personality. So hopefully the company offers skill sets, right? And personality assessments so that they can do that. Now, depending on the business you're in, background checks are highly important. Okay? So I don't know if HR is doing that, but can a manager trust somebody to handle sensitive information that hasn't gone through a background check? We want to make sure we interview people on challenging things. My favorite question to ask in an interview and on a behavioral interview is to tell me what felt unfair to you in your last job. And I came up with this because I've been hired I can't test an engineer about the engineering skills, but I can interview them about who they are and how they're going to show up. And I've learned that we spend too much time in the comfortable middle. So I'm going to ask, hey, what felt unfair to you about your last job? Because what I don't want to do is hire a victim. Okay, I want to know how they handle what feels unfair to them, because guess what? Something's going to feel unfair to them working for me, and I want to know how they deal with things that feel unfair. When somebody tells you what felt unfair, you can do it a Six Sigma training where you go 5 whys. Well, why that feel unfair? Why that? Why that? And you'll get their personality on full display. And I can give you examples of having done that and just the crazy responses I get. But trust me, it is the very best behavioral interview question you can ever use. And on the opposite end of that spectrum is, what were you most excited about in your last jobs? Because that's where people's natural affinity is. And how can I take advantage of that energy and affinity here? Now, sometimes we don't have very good online skill tests, or maybe we just want to take them through a case scenario. And a case scenario could be, here's 3 pieces of wood, build a chair, or you've got a difficult customer in front of you that's asking for a return of an item that clearly you know that they wore, and they bought it to return it. How are you going to handle that thing? Well, if you're at Nordstrom's, they're always right, and you accept the return. If you're at another environment, they may, no, we don't do that here, okay? And lastly, if they're in any kind of physical type of position, we want to make sure they're fit for duty. So let's say they're lifting boxes or something heavy all day long, and you don't know that they're permanent stationary in the right shoulder, 15 pounds, and lifting 25-pound boxes. How long is it going to be before they injure themselves or somebody else? So this is just basic black and white testing, and you want to make sure you don't hand your new managers people where they haven't gone through this. You want to make sure your manager has gone through this. Now, one thing I've had that management teams I've been training do is create some simple rules to their team. And I love this book, all right? And it's amazing. Steve Jobs at Apple was a freak about simplicity. So I had them go through the exercise of creating 3 to 5 rules that the team will live by. Not some corporate culture thing, not some big thing. That team and what they're going to live by. So, for example, we'll all treat each other with respect, right? If there's something that needs to be said, then say it. Whatever the rules are, it's a great exercise for new managers to go through with their teams. So you're not living in a world of assumption. Again, you're living in a world of agreements. You're not living in a world of expectations. You live in a world of agreements. Because when people get upset, it's simply because somebody didn't live up to an expectation of ours. My question is, did you have an agreement? I'll give you a simple example. Our son, Kyle. Hey, Kyle, can you throw out the garbage? Sure, Pop. Next morning, the garbage is still there. All right, Kyle, I thought I asked you to throw out the garbage. He goes, oh, okay, I didn't know you wanted that already. Now, I lived in a world of assumption and expectation that when I ask somebody to do something, they're going to say, how high you want me to jump? But that's not what he heard. He goes, hey, I throw it out the garbage sooner or later. So I had to change the conversation with him. Hal, will you agree to throw the garbage out before you go to sleep? That's a completely different conversation. Can you throw out the garbage? Because if it's there the next morning, it's not about the garbage being there. It's about him living up to his agreements. So we want to have simple rules. We want to get to agreements so that we don't live in a world of expectation and assumption. So one of the team exercises, and another thing that we can do is we can go through around a team and say, okay, what's the most important thing you do with each other? Bob, what's the most important things you do every day? Here's the 3 most important things. How can we support you doing that job better? How can we support you doing that job better? How can we support you doing that job better? So setting up the rules as well as how we can support each other is an amazing exercise for new managers to go through. So what can the managers do to build teamwork? Now, performance management. I realize that we've made performance management way too complex, and I'm not going to get into the whole conversation about 1 to 5 performance evaluations or, numering. In my legal career, I saw 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. Managers don't give low scores because they've given them a low score. Maybe the bozo who managed that person or hired that person, and it's really their fault. They don't want to give really high scores because they don't want people to have, think that they walk on water or inflated egos or expect more pay than you can afford, all these types of things. So we tend to move to the comfortable middle. I never use performance evaluations with my employees. I thought they're ridiculous. But we did focus on what are the most important things you do every day. Let's get clear about that. So one of the exercises that I do in a lot of my workshops, the CEOs will very often bring their HR executive. And you can do this if you're in HR with your CEO or whoever's managing you, no matter what job you're in. So you write down what you think. I go to CEOs. I want you to write down on a piece of paper what you think the 3 most important things your HR person does every day. Now, you HR person, I want you to write down what you think are the 3 most important things you do every day. And then when we turn those sheets so everybody can see them, they never match. Here we are, literally thinking we're on the same page with each other, but went to the most simplest of tests. They don't match. I have one HR person. I did that with my boss, and I wrote down hiring, retention, and engagement. He wrote down compliance. All right. So first of all, we want alignment. All right. We want alignment. The second question is, how would you know if you were doing any of these jobs well without you having to ask me or without my having to tell you, because the benchmarks are so clear? So as a manager, what are the 3 most important things or up to 5 most important things you're going to do as a manager? How would you know if you're doing them well? Does a baseball player have to ask the coach, am I hitting well? No, they know the benchmarks. Well, as close as you can get to a benchmark as possible is what you're going to want to do. And last but not least, what do you need to do your job better? Okay. So what are the most important things you do? What are the benchmarks that are related to them? And what do you need for me to support you to do your job better? These are great questions for management to ask their teammates. If we're going to do the reviews, get rid of the 1 to 5, keep it simple. People either meet expectation, fail to meet expectation, or exceed expectation. Simple enough. So expectations to agreements, you just watch, whether it's at work or at home. Next time you get upset about something, ask yourself, did I just have an expectation of this person, or did I have an agreement with this person? And a lot of times that's on time stuff. When a CEO goes to me, he goes, yeah, I gave I'm talking about this, one of the subordinates, I asked him to look into something. 2 weeks later, I said, did you look into that? He goes, oh, you wanted it already. The employees had a full list of things they got to do, figured that what the CEO was asking wasn't as important as other stuff, and rank ordered when he was going to do it himself. And they never had a meeting of the minds about the deliverables. So anytime there's any timelines, meeting of the mind is so important. Prioritizing is so important. And we really want to focus on results because it's what matters is results. Let people know whether they're hitting their results or not. Sorry, too fast here. Let them know about it. Now, if people are not performing, the first question is it the fault of the system? And sometimes that manager is the system. So that business of taking responsibility for putting people in a system where they're capable of success. For example, the system may be, I treat all employees exactly the same, even though they're wired differently. And one approach with one employee doesn't meet an approach with some other employee. But if we don't get to know what really moves the needle with people, then we are the system that's not working very well. Now, maybe this employee or that manager is really a misfit and they don't belong in this position. They're a good person, willing to work hard, but they don't have the training. That's not really their thing. They don't have the desire. They don't have the skill set. So maybe they're misfit someplace else. One of my clients hired somebody to help with HR admin. And after COVID, they got smacked with so much recruiting need that they asked her to help out and become a recruiter. Within 2 months, she became their top recruiter. She wasn't necessarily a misfit, but she was a better fit in recruiting than as an admin assistant. Okay. Well, instruction and training helps. Sometimes the people with the right attitude, we thought they had some skill set, but they don't. But all right, we can train them up for that skill set. Are we going to put them on a performance improvement plan, or a PIP as they're known? Look, as somebody who's been a lawyer forever, I can tell you that those things seldom work. If you haven't documented by now, and you're using a PIP to have some documentation and to cover your rear end when you eventually fire people because they're probably not going to meet the performance improvement plan, be honest about why you're using these things. Again, maybe they're better suited elsewhere in another department, another position, or you may know a client that they would be perfect for, okay? We certainly want to make sure that there's proper notice. When employees are surprised, that's a bad sign. No employee should be surprised that they're not meeting expectations. No, that's why we have agreements, because that eliminates that. And managers have to know how important it is to document stuff. Managers, like most people, don't want to be disliked. And they know when they document something, that person's going to dislike them to a certain degree. So we kind of, come on, please, will you step up? We don't document. And people don't take things seriously unless it's documented. I was in a trial one time, and my client was claiming sexual harassment. And the manager, and that she was fired and retaliated against because she claimed sexual harassment. I had the manager on a stand, and their position they took that she was fired because of her tardiness. One reason she was tardy, she didn't want to get in the elevator with the guy that always waited for her. That was sexual harassment. Get that out of the way. But anyway, I said, I have this guy on the stand. I said, sir, so you're telling me it's because of attendance. And you also tell me that there's no documentation for that. Is that correct? I said, as a manager, you've had to hear at some point in your career that you should document poor performance, right? What's he going to say? Never heard that and look like a complete idiot? So he said, yes. So I said, but you didn't document this performance. And I find that when people don't document this performance, it's either been because they were too busy and didn't have the time to do it, or it really wasn't that important. So I got him stuck, and he can't say it wasn't really that important because he's defending his case on it. So he said, well, I was very busy. I said, okay. So I go up to the judge. I bring up a legal pad, and I said, Your Honor, I would like him to write down that Susie was late on this date and to sign it and date it and see how long that takes him to do that. Because that's all the documentation he needed, right? And I see opposing counsel's face go, oh my God. So the judge smiled, sir, I'll allow that. So I go up to the manager on the stand. I said, sir, no, I just told you, I said, so what you're telling me is it's the time factor. So I want you to show the jury how much time we're really talking about. So I hand him the pad and the pen. I said, I want you to document the fact that Susie was late and on a certain date, came in at a certain time, date and site. I want to see how long that takes. It didn't take a minute. I said, sir, that took less than a minute. We've already been in trial for how many days? Objection. All right, I withdraw the question. Okay. Again, you don't want to have your pants pulled down in a trial by a lawyer like me, because that's exactly what will happen when you don't document. Okay. So there's a very simple litmus test about letting people go. And I ask them, I'll ask these HR people, these managers, or these executives, I go, do you have anybody working for you today that if they quit, you would be relieved instead of upset? And I get this painful look back, like, yeah, we got them. Am I kidding around? I go, is it a relative? Do they have photos or text messages on you? What are you being blackballed with? And you want to put a stick in your eye another time and keep pounding it in there? Why are they still there? And if you keep on a poor performer, you tell the rest of the team that that's acceptable. That's the biggest mistake. If you're going to be a high-performing organization, you have to let go of poor performers. You can give them a chance. I want to give them a long leash. It's going to have to happen soon. And what ends up happening is if we keep people on long enough, they start getting the idea they might get fired. All of a sudden, they start pulling out what I call the card. Or I'm disabled, or this is discrimination, or this is harassment, or something like that, to protect themselves, because they know once they do that, they have some type of protection. Okay? And so who wants to fire them now? We even have a statute in California that basically said if you fire somebody within 90 days of them making a complaint about something, you're going to presume that is retaliatory. Right? So if you're going to let them go, let them go before they start inventing some ways to protect themselves by pulling out the card. So what can the manager do to improve the performance of the team? Now, time management. It literally is our most precious resource. It's all we have. And again, so many of our managers and executives are on overwhelm because they don't manage their time well. That's the bottom line of it. When I sold my company to Think HR, they were amazed how much revenue I had for the number of employees I had, and how efficient it was, and how well paid my employees were because they worked in the highest and best use. So, for example, do you want to give somebody $50 to do $20 an hour work? But that goes on all day long, right? I didn't, since it was coming out of Don's pocket, I didn't want to give anybody a $50 bill and say, here, now do $20 an hour work with it, right? So that's a poor use of their time. You may or may not be an Elon Musk fan, but I was watching him speak to a bunch of Saudi businessmen at a big conference there. He's in a chair with another guy interviewing in another chair, and he asked him, what's the most difficult decision you've had to make? And this was his answer, and I was blown away by it and got it. I did not expect that to be the answer, but I got it immediately. The most difficult decision I have is what to do with my time. And that is true, not for Elon Musk, that is true for every one of us, including our new managers, okay? So I've read over 1,000 books. That's what happens when you only work 40 hours a week. You get to do a lot of learning. And this is probably the best leadership book I've ever read. In fact, I would maybe I'd buy a copy for my new managers and encourage them to read it and see what they learned from it. And the first thing he asked the CEOs to do, in this case, that's who he was dealing with, was to track their time. Now, as a trial lawyer, I knew when my time went for 17 years in tenths of an hour. As Lincoln said, a lawyer's time is their tool and trade. And then when I got out from underneath that yoke, I was so relieved to not have to track every minute. And then I read this book and I realized, you know what? I don't know where my time goes anymore because I don't track it anymore. So I had me and all my employees, I created some simple Excel tools. They're on my website. I have me and my employees go through how we're using our time. And Drucker says that when we're in management and executive ranks, we want to spend 80% of our day doing only what we can do uniquely. right? 20% of our day making sure other people do their jobs, and none of our day wasting time. So to what extent are we in that 80-20-0 category? So by wasting time, that's when you've got a $50 an hour person doing $20 an hour work. That's a complete waste of time. And so I want to make sure my managers act as managers and not a bunch of employees who now think they can control other employees. Yeah, that just doesn't work. So we want them to think as leaders, even if they're new managers, because they are. That's the person leading that team is that new manager. Now, how do we get our managers? And what I'm dealing with so many of the managers I'm dealing with right now is to delegate. And what I learned is not to delegate to assumption. I don't care how long somebody's been working around me or with me. I'm going to delegate to a standard operating procedure. And the standard operating procedure is what I do and how I do it. So I literally, as a lawyer, I do a lot of dictation. So I will literally think through my day and dictate what I'm doing now is this, and this is how I'm doing it. And I have that typed up. Now I got a standard operating procedure that I can hand to somebody instead of just assuming that since they've been around me, they've learned this through osmosis, right? So that's one way. And one of my favorite books was Michael Gerber's The E-Myth. And he said, we want to build our companies as if we're trying to franchise them. I didn't have to read that book twice. So I had SOPs for how we did everything. And it really allowed people to delegate down, all right? That is so important. We want to make sure that we can train people that we're delegating to. We can shadow people that we're trying to. We can check in with them on a regular basis. We do not want to micromanage them. That is the biggest mistake new managers get into, is that control-based micromanagement. Stop it, all right? And they're going to have to let people make mistakes. So I would, in advance, ask my employees, where could be the potential for making a mistake? Well, I don't understand the instruction. Let's do it. Let's clarify the SOP. I don't know what you want me to prioritize. You add it to this onto my plate. Maybe I need to take something off my plate, and let's talk about that. And then I love the book Principles by Ray Dalio, the billionaire hedge fund manager who is known for being great at delegation. And his quote around it, he says, when I delegate, I expect them to scratch the car, but I won't put them in a position where they can wreck it. And that is, so I had to let my employees make one mistake, and we had a one mistake rule. If people are going to make mistakes, you've made mistakes, I've made mistakes, that's how we learn mostly. And then, am I going to deprive somebody of that because I don't make them anymore? Really? They're going to hit a learning curve. They're going to make mistakes. So let them wreck the car. And our rule with my employees, I had the one mistake rule. There's no reason for any of us to make the same mistake twice. But we're going to make mistakes. We're going to experiment. We're going to fail faster than the competition. We're going to make mistakes faster than the competition. My team is going to make mistakes faster than anybody in this company. And that's how we get ahead of everybody at this company. So what can that manager do to manage their time better? Now, showing that you care. The zeitgeist, which is a German term for spirit of the times, the zeitgeist is overwhelm and underappreciation. All these managers that I coach are in overwhelm. Every single one of them are working more hours than they want to. And they don't feel appreciated. Nobody seems to care. I said, guess what? You got to watch seeking appreciation from somebody who themselves is on overwhelm and feeling underappreciated. How's that supposed to happen? And I love the Byron Katie quote, Lord, save me from the need to be loved and appreciated by others. Amen. So sitting around like an eating puppy dog is psychologically not healthy, right? And yet, recognition is a must. Look, this is 2,000 years old, right? Does he thank the servant because he did all those things you commanded? I think not. All right, this whole business of recognition has been around forever, okay? Of the books that I've read, some of them have had major impacts, and this one has had a major impact on me. Leadership and Self-Deception. You don't have to read the book. I'll give you the bottom line of it. The self-deception is that I am a caring person, therefore I show people that fact. So if I had a team of managers in front of me, I will ask them a simple, raise your hand if you consider yourself a caring person. I'll raise their hand. Now, give me an example of how you showed somebody that you manage, that you care about them recently. And there's deafening silence in the room. And then when people do speak up, it tends to be wrapped around a calamity. Well, kid got hurt, or somebody got cancer, or somebody died, or something like that happened. And a simple question, do you need a calamity to show people you care about them? And I had to reflect on myself and saying, yes, of course I'm caring to my employees and my family, but I also realized I was running 75 miles an hour at that time. And I wasn't showing people that I cared about them. So I wore a little wristband, a rubber band around my wrist, and just wrote care on it. And I made an effort to show at least one person a day that I cared about them for 30 straight days, which built that awareness and muscle, right? Because again, if you don't care about people, why should they care about you? Now, the number one way to show anybody you care about them is to listen to them. When people are running 75 miles an hour, they're terrible listeners. Who's got time to listen to anything? So I take people through this 5-minute exercise where person A has to talk about where they want to go with their career, their life. Person B has to just sit there and listen, giving zero feedback. I tell them they got to sit there like a stone statue or a Buddhist monk. No feedback whatsoever. And then they switch roles and we debrief it. So the first person I asked who was doing the talking, I said, what did it feel like to go for 5 straight minutes without any interruption? They go, first of all, it felt weird because I'm not used to being able to express myself freely. And because they're not used to expressing themselves for 5 minutes without being interrupted, a lot of them run out of stuff to say in a minute or two. Never mind, we're just talking about where they spend most of their time the rest of their life. So what ends up happening in that silence is normally the listener can't handle the silence and will bug and come in with something to say, but they don't have that choice. They have to remain quiet. And what happens is the person speaking will then reformulate because they're not used to having that length of time to express themselves, and they'll go again. But if that's where you allow it, the saying goes, allowing the silence to do the heavy lifting. Are your new managers good listeners? Now, on the other side of it, what did it feel like to listen for 5 minutes without interrupting? Really weird. Now, raise your hand if you had more than one conversation going on in your head. And they all raise their hand. So it's a conversation of listening to that person and the sidebar conversation going on like, hey, did what I just say make sense to that person? Or it's going to be my turn next. What am I going to say? Well, they got their stuff together, then I got my stuff together. Or did the Yankees win today? Or what's going to, what I got to do with that stuff when I get home tonight? So it's very hard to listen when you got 2 conversations going on in your head. So I learned a technique from my study of neuro-linguistic programming. And in NLP, they talk about mirroring. So if somebody in sales is sitting with an arm crossed in front of you, you should be sitting with your arm crossed in front of them. People feel most comfortable looking in a mirror. And I realize you can also mirror people verbally. So people say stuff, and if your whole goal is to be able to repeat back what they said word for word, you have no ability to have a sidebar conversation. And when you're stuffed and you're not able to repeat back word for word, you say something like, you know what, before you go further, please, hold on a second before you go further. I want to make sure I understand what you just said. What I heard you say was blankety, blankety, blank. And you might ask a clarifying question. When you say that, what do you mean by that? Please continue. I played that game for 30 minutes. I call it playing a game. How long can you be in a conversation with somebody where you add no new information? You try 5 minutes at home tonight, and you'll wonder what happened to you today. And I love this adage, and I can't find an attribution to it, but leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say, and you can put in their managers, you can say in their parents, okay? Now, finally, we got a minute or two just to wrap up with the career plan stuff. So one of the things I have people do is I have them look at LinkedIn and say, where do you want to be someday? And you can look at, if you got a big enough company, you can look at people in your company. But let's say somebody's just starting off in accounting. At someday they want to be a senior accountant and they love pets. So my dream job would be a senior accountant at Petco like Carissa has. Well, you can look at Carissa's resume on LinkedIn and see how she got there. You can see what the career path is. And what you realize, if you do that enough people, nobody's got the exact same career path. There's a lot of different ways to get to that point, but there's always progress in all of that. All right. And you can do it if I'm going to be a sales manager, where do I want to be a sales manager? So I love using LinkedIn for this exercise, right? I also like the competency model clearinghouse. So if you go to Career One Stop and you can see the competency model clearinghouse, this allows you to put together career ladders for people. So if you don't have a career ladder, you can put together a career ladder for somebody who's a manager to move up the ranks at your company. Okay, I love this website. I could spend a half an hour easily showing you all the different resources in it, but take advantage of yourself and you'll see a ton of stuff in there. Take advantage of it. They'll give you a competency model for an entire organization, never mind just for an individual. They give you an example of career ladders, and they're also known as lattices. This is a sample that comes from the hospitality industry. We want to help them set goals around their career. And I love my clients right now are doing their career goal setting. They're going to put it in their Workday HRIS program and work with their employees to set the goals for the rest of the year. The SMART acronym is good as anything for career goal setting. So we want to think about career advancement in terms of SMART goals. We want to think in terms of short-term and long-term. We want to be able to show a career ladder. Those career ladders are helpful from everything from recruiting to retention. We really want to talk about alignment around vision, mission, values, and goals, the big picture stuff. And I like using OKRs, not just for managing people, but for managing our careers. What are 3 main goals for your career? What are your deadlines and objectives to get there? So what can we do to identify my goals and create a career plan? If you help your managers create career plans, they're going to stay with you longer because they can see the opportunity with you. And one thing you've got to watch is don't let titles get in the way. So let's say somebody's a level 1 manager and the next roll up, there's 3 people in that position and they ain't leaving for any time. So what choice do I have to grow unless I leave this place? That's crazy. Don't let titles get in the way of career growth. Make them a manager 2, a manager 3. Law firms used to be just associates and partners. They've learned to have these different tiers to help retain people. You know, how many people want to work at a place 7 years to find out if they're going to be a partner or not? Not many anymore. So in conclusion, this is a story. This is the best story ever for your managers. They can watch this and you can talk about the presentation we did with them. But I think this is what I would share with anybody about helping people become great new managers. So make sure they know their why, understand that control is dead, make sure they understand the math of the impact of their managing, help them to build a team. It's all about performance management. It's about clarity of expectations, going to agreements, really manage your time well. Don't do $20 an hour work if you're getting paid $100,000 a year. Know where your time goes. You make good use of your calendar. Show people you care and engage in career planning. And as a manager, help your employees engage in career planning as well. Final thought here, and I love Paul Hawken. Good management is the art of making problems so interesting, their solutions so constructed that everybody wants to work and deal with them. And when I see this quote, I always harken back to Tom Sawyer, where Huck Finn got everybody to paint the fence. You know, if that's not this, they made painting the fence so interesting that everybody wanted to paint the fence for the guy. You know, it's awesome. So there's my contact information. If you go to my website, you will see a ton of tools. I gave you just a couple of them today. You'll see even more of them on there. Please just download them. You don't need to put your email address in or anything like that. Just make good use of them.
Wow, what an amazing session. A huge thank you to our special guest, Don Phin, for sharing his expert insights on how new managers can avoid those all too common practice pitfalls. As always, Don, your guidance is not only practical, but empowering. We truly appreciate your time and expertise. Don's experience and passion for leadership development shine through every time. If you haven't already, be sure to check out his work at donphin.com for more thought leadership and valuable resources. And of course, thank you for attending today's live webinar. We know your time is valuable, and we're so glad you chose to spend it with us. If you haven't yet, don't forget you can comment "New Manager Training" at any point during the webinar replay to unlock an exclusive discount on any healthcare training leader product or service. Just our way of saying thank you for being part of this engaged community. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to Healthcare Training Leader YouTube channel. That way, you'll stay up to date with the latest on healthcare compliance, billing and coding updates, revenue cycle strategies, and so much more to help your practice thrive. Thanks again for joining us, and remember, great managers aren't born, they're trained. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and keep leading with confidence.